The atmosphere inside the brasserie was thick with luxury, where clinking champagne glasses reverberated against the soft hum of conversation. Polished waiters glided effortlessly through the upscale restaurant, delivering delicate plates and refilling glasses. The lighting cast warm hues across the room, bathing the patrons in a golden glow. It was a place where power, wealth, and secrets collided. But for Maretta Bruno, this restaurant wasn't a world she was meant to belong to. It was merely a backdrop, a place where she faded into the shadows of the rich and powerful. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's go back to hours before, where it all started. At 25, Maretta was already accustomed to being unseen. Her light olive skin, dark hair pulled back into a neat ponytail, and slender, athletic build barely made a ripple in the pristine environment around her. Dressed in her crisp, white-fitted long-sleeve shirt, tailored black waistcoat, and knee-length pencil skirt, she moved through the sea of suited businessmen and immaculately dressed women with practiced ease, always just a bit apart from the action. She refilled wine glasses, carried plates, and offered polite smiles. But she had learned a long time ago that in a place like this, her role was always the same: to serve, to disappear. Maretta was invisible, and she had long since learned to accept it. Her life outside the restaurant wasn't much different. Maretta lived in a cramped apartment with her mother, Elena Bruno, a woman whose past was an enigma. Growing up, Maretta had always noticed the faint sadness in her mother's eyes, the way she avoided talking about certain things, especially when it came to her own history. Elena would often speak in hushed tones about their past, but there were always gaps in her stories, unfinished sentences, and long silences where words should have been. Maretta had never pushed for answers, respecting her mother's boundaries. But deep down, she couldn't help but wonder about the secrets Elena had locked away. Tonight, however, was different. The steady rhythm of the restaurant's operations was interrupted by the arrival of a particular guest, Napoleon Padovano. His entrance was nothing short of magnetic. The room seemed to pause for a moment, the air thick with tension as the Mafia boss entered. Napoleon exuded an undeniable power, an authority that made even the most seasoned criminals in the room uneasy. His salt and pepper hair was slicked back, and his short-trimmed beard framed a sharp face that seemed carved from stone. He wore a perfectly tailored pinstripe suit, gold cufflinks glistening in the light, and a deep burgundy silk tie that completed his look of calculated perfection. He moved with the kind of ease that came from knowing he owned everything around him. As he settled into the corner booth, his companions greeted him with wary smiles, a subtle recognition of the power that radiated from him. Maretta, who had just entered the room with a tray of drinks, noticed something she hadn't expected. His left hand, resting casually on the table, displayed a tattoo, a faded nautical star with a date beneath it, June 14th, 2000 star. Maretta's heart skipped a beat as the tattoo's significance hit her. She knew that symbol intimately. Her mother, Elena, had the same tattoo, the same date, the same design. Her pulse quickened, and for a moment, Maretta stopped in her tracks, staring at the tattoo. She had always wondered about the meaning behind it, the way her mother would sometimes trace the faded lines of her own tattoo in quiet moments, as if lost in thought. But now, in front of her, was the man who had once shared that same symbol with her mother. The man she had never known, but somehow had always felt present in the background of her life. Napoleon Padovano. Maretta's hand trembled slightly as she steadied the tray. The moment of truth had arrived. She was about to speak the words she had never dared utter before. With a steadying breath, she walked toward the table, her mind racing. "Excuse me, sir." Maretta's voice faltered slightly as she stood before Napoleon. He didn't look up immediately, his attention absorbed in conversation with the others at the table. But when she stood before him, his eyes flickered to her. His gaze was polite but distant, dismissive even. He wasn't used to being interrupted. "May I help you?" His voice was low, commanding but not unkind. I'm sorry to disturb you, Meretta continued, trying to remain composed as she held the wine glass. I couldn't help but notice your tattoo. My mother has the exact same one. Napoleon's gaze hardened almost imperceptibly, and the chatter around the table seemed to vanish. The room, which had felt warm and filled with energy just moments ago, suddenly became oppressive. Miretta's heart hammered in her chest as she struggled to maintain her composure. Napoleon's eyes locked onto hers, his expression unreadable. The tension between them was thick, palpable. What did you say? His voice was now colder, sharper. His companions had stopped talking, sensing the shift in energy. Miretta swallowed hard, her mouth dry. My mother has the same tattoo, she repeated, her voice quieter now. The same design, the same date. She told me she got it when she was in college. June 14th, 2000. She said it was with someone she loved. Napoleon's face shifted, his expression flickering with something Miretta couldn't quite place. Something between recognition and disbelief. He froze for a moment, his hand trembling ever so slightly as his fingers brushed the edge of his glass. The jovial atmosphere of the room now felt like a distant memory, replaced by something heavier, something uncertain. I'm sorry, but I don't, Miretta's voice faltered. Her name is Elena Bruno. She always said she was in love with a man back then, but he disappeared. The words hung in the air, suspended in the stillness that had descended on the table. For a moment, no one moved. The silence was deafening. Napoleon's face drained of color, his hand tightening around the glass. He slowly leaned back in his seat, away from Miretta, as if trying to distance himself from the reality she had just thrust upon him. Miretta, though frozen in place, could see the confusion and shock in his eyes. That's impossible, Napoleon whispered, almost to himself. His voice was strained, his expression wavering between disbelief and something darker. He turned toward his companions, who were now eyeing him with growing concern. Miretta stood frozen, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest, unsure of how to proceed. You said her name was Elena? He asked, his voice barely audible. Miretta nodded, still unsure of where this conversation was headed. She said she had a miscarriage, Miretta continued, her voice now trembling. She said she lost a baby, but now I'm thinking she lied. She lied about everything. Napoleon's eyes widened in realization, but he quickly masked it, regaining his usual controlled demeanor. How old are you? He demanded, his voice now sharper than before. I'm 25, Miretta replied, the sting of his scrutiny biting at her. The air between them crackled with unspoken truths. Miretta had always wondered about her father, but her mother had never spoken of him. She had always wondered why they had nothing, why they struggled. June 14th, Napoleon muttered, his gaze fixed on the tattoo once more. That date, his voice trailed off, his mind clearly racing as the pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. Suddenly, he stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back. The tension in the room was unbearable. Miretta barely registered the gazes of the other patrons, who had turned to witness the unfolding scene. Napoleon, his face now pale, scanned the table, lost in thought. Who are you? He asked, finally breaking the silence, his voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and emotion. Miretta Bruno, she replied, her heart racing. Elena's daughter. Napoleon stared at her, his mind spinning with a whirlwind of emotions. Guilt, confusion, regret. And then, as the weight of her words sank in, his face softened. His eyes seemed to plead with her, as if he were testing the reality of what she had just revealed. I have a daughter, he whispered to himself, as if trying to come to terms with it. Elena, she never told me. She never told me. She kept the baby. The room fell completely still. Napoleon's hands clenched into fists at his sides, as if trying to hold himself together. Miretta stood frozen, her breath catching in her throat as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The man before her, the Mafia boss with an empire built on power and secrecy, was her father. The revelation seemed to shake Napoleon to his core. He had built an empire, a life of luxury, buried in regrets. But now, the past had come crashing into his present. Meretta could see the conflict in his face. The anger he had felt moments ago now replaced by something softer, more vulnerable. "I need to speak with you," Napoleon said quietly, his voice raw with emotion. "I need to see your mother. Now." Meretta hesitated for a moment, torn between the overwhelming need for answers and the fear of what this all meant. But deep down, she knew this was the moment that would change everything. "Okay," she whispered, nodding. Meretta's heart pounded as she followed Napoleon through the restaurant's kitchen and out into the cool night air. The tension from the table still hung in the air, like an unseen weight. She could feel the stares of the other patrons on her back as they watched the Mafia boss walk past them. His demeanor so composed, yet so rigid, it was as if he were trying to suppress a storm within him. She swallowed hard, trying to calm the nerves building up in her chest. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but there was no turning back now. The revelation of who he was, of what he might be to her, had shattered the fragile world she had built around herself. Now, everything was uncertain. Her eyes kept darting to the tattoo on his left hand, the faded symbol that linked them both. It seemed to burn in her mind, and with every step they took, her thoughts grew heavier. They reached the door to the alleyway, a small, quiet space behind the restaurant where delivery trucks occasionally parked. Napoleon paused, turning to face her, his expression unreadable. "Tell me more about your mother," he said quietly, his voice controlled but tinged with a rawness that made Meretta's breath catch. Meretta hesitated for a moment, unsure how to start. She had never spoken about her mother's past to anyone. Not really. Elena, her mother, had always kept her history hidden behind layers of protective silence. Meretta had never pushed her, but deep down, she had always felt the absence of answers. The mystery of her mother's life before Meretta was a constant, unspoken presence between them. She never really talked about it, Meretta began, her voice shaking slightly. But there were always hints, little things. She wore long sleeves, even in the summer. Always hid that tattoo. It was like a secret, one she never shared with me. Napoleon's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of something, a memory, maybe, passing over his face. "And yet you knew about it." Meretta nodded. "I saw it a few times when she'd roll up her sleeves, or when she was asleep. It's the same one you have." Her voice faltered. "Same design. Same date. June 14th, he murmured, his fingers instinctively brushing over the faded tattoo on his hand, as if to confirm its presence. He stared at Meretta for a long moment, his expression hard to read. Why would she get a tattoo like that? Why hide it? Meretta shook her head, frustration creeping into her tone. "I don't know. She never talked about it, not really. But she did mention someone she was in love with at university. She said he was the one who got it with her. And then he disappeared." She swallowed hard. "She said he was gone after something, a traumatic event, I think." Napoleon's face tightened. He crossed his arms, and his gaze turned inward, as if the words had struck a chord deep within him. For a long time, he said nothing. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Meretta, now feeling vulnerable and exposed, shifted on her feet. She had pushed him, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for the answers. She had always wondered about her father, but this moment, this confrontation with a man she had never known, a man whose presence had always lingered like a shadow in the background of her life, was too much to process. Finally, Napoleon spoke, his voice low, almost to himself. "I thought I lost her. I thought she was gone for good." His words were slow, as if he were piecing together fragments of a past he had long since buried. Meretta didn't understand, but something in his tone made her stomach twist. She wanted to ask more questions, to probe further, but the uncertainty in her own heart held her back. He took a step closer to her, his gaze sharp but not unkind. "Tell me, Meretta, why now? Why are you bringing this up?" His eyes softened for the briefest moment before hardening again. "What do you think this means for you?" Her throat tightened. She wanted answers, but the truth, whatever it was, felt like it would shatter the fragile foundation of her life. "I don't know," she admitted softly. but I've been living with so many questions. And now I find out that you're the one she was in love with? That? You're the one she kept from me? I need to know, Napoleon. What happened to her? Why didn't she ever tell me the truth? Napoleon looked away, his gaze momentarily lost in the darkness of the alley. I had my reasons, he said, his voice almost a whisper, but none of them were good enough. The tension between them was palpable. Meretta could feel the weight of the past pressing down on both of them, suffocating and unyielding. She was finally confronting the man who had been absent from her life for 25 years, and yet he felt as much a stranger as the father she had never known. She wanted to reach out, to ask more questions, but she could see that he was struggling with something far deeper than she could understand. The walls he had built around himself were not easily broken. Elena told me she had a miscarriage, Meretta continued, her voice trembling with the weight of her own confusion. She said she lost the baby. But if she lied about that, then what else did she lie about? Napoleon's expression faltered. His jaw clenched, and for a moment, Meretta saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. Something raw, something human. She didn't lie, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought she was gone. I thought the baby was gone too. Meretta's heart skipped a beat. The words were so simple, but they held so much weight. It was as if the ground beneath her feet had suddenly shifted. You didn't know? She asked, the disbelief in her voice evident. Napoleon shook his head slowly. No, I didn't know. I thought she had miscarried. I never knew she kept you, Meretta. His eyes locked with hers. I never knew you existed. The weight of his words settled over Meretta like a cloud. She stood there, stunned, trying to comprehend what he had just admitted. Her father, this man who had held such power and control over so many lives, had no idea she existed. He had lived in the dark, just as she had. Tears welled up in Meretta's eyes, but she blinked them away. This was the moment that would define everything, the moment when the truth finally came out. How old are you? Napoleon asked, his voice hoarse. 25, Meretta replied quietly. I was born in 1998. Napoleon took a step back, as if the information had struck him with the force of a physical blow. His face drained of color, and for the first time, Meretta saw a flicker of regret, a deep, almost unbearable sadness. The realization hit him hard, and Meretta could feel the shift in his entire being. The walls he had built over the years were crumbling, piece by piece. I didn't know, he repeated softly, as if the words didn't quite make sense to him. I didn't know you were alive. I didn't know. The weight of the silence was overwhelming. Meretta wanted to scream, to ask him why, to demand answers, but instead, all she could do was stand there, caught in the turbulence of her emotions. Elena kept you from me, Napoleon said, his voice breaking slightly. But I should have fought for you. I should have fought for both of you. Meretta didn't know how to respond. She had so many questions, so many things to say, but the truth had become too complicated, too painful to fully understand. And then, in a quiet voice, he spoke again. I need to find her, Meretta. I need to see her. I need to fix this. For you. For both of you. Meretta's heart raced. She had never thought this day would come, but now it had. She had found the man who had been missing from her life for so long. And now, it seemed, he was trying to find her mother, trying to make things right. But was it possible to undo the damage that had been done? Could they ever rebuild what had been lost? The answer wasn't clear, but as she looked into Napoleon's eyes, Meretta realized that whatever happened next, this was the beginning of something neither of them had been prepared for. As Meretta nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in, she could hear the faint hum of a car approaching the alley. And then, as if guided by fate, the car's headlights swept across the shadows. A familiar figure stepped out. It was her mother. The sound of gravel crunching under slow, deliberate footsteps filled the alley. Meretta's breath caught as her mother stepped into the soft pool of light cast by the car's headlights. Elena Bruno looked older than Meretta remembered, her face drawn, her eyes weary, but there was still that quiet strength about her, the kind that had carried them through years of struggle. Her hands trembled slightly as she closed the car door, but her voice was steady. Meretta, she called softly, her tone laced with disbelief and dread. What are you doing here? Meretta froze, her pulse quickening. Napoleon turned slowly, his eyes dark and searching. The tension between them was immediate, heavy, almost tangible. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sounds were the hum of the idling engine and the distant city noise beyond the alley. Mom, Meretta whispered, her voice cracking. You need to tell me the truth. Elena's gaze flicked between her daughter and the man standing beside her. When her eyes met Napoleon's, a wave of old pain passed through her expression. She looked as though she'd seen a ghost, one she had tried to bury long ago. Napoleon's voice broke the silence. Elena. The name came out as a whisper, almost reverent, as if speaking it aloud might undo the years between them. After all this time, Elena's breath hitched, and she shook her head slowly. You shouldn't be here, she said, her tone brittle. Not now. Not after everything. Meretta looked between them, confusion and frustration swelling inside her. You two know each other, she said, the words almost accusing. You've known each other this whole time, haven't you? Neither of them answered. The silence confirmed what she already knew. Napoleon took a small step closer. I thought you were gone, he said, his voice rough. They told me you didn't make it, that there was nothing left. Elena's lips trembled, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. You believed them because it was easier than fighting for the truth. The words landed like a blow. Meretta could see the guilt flicker in Napoleon's eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but Elena raised a hand to stop him. Don't, she said softly. Not here. Not like this. Meretta's voice broke through the tension. Someone explain what's going on, she demanded. I'm done being left in the dark. Elena turned toward her daughter, the hard edges of her expression softening. You were never supposed to find out this way, she said quietly. That tattoo you saw, there's a reason I hid it. Napoleon's gaze fell to his own hand, tracing the faded lines of the nautical star. It was our promise, he murmured. We got them together. We thought it would bind us forever. Meretta frowned, struggling to piece the fragments together. Bind you? For what? Elena's eyes glistened as she looked at her daughter. For love, she said simply. For a love that wasn't meant to survive. Her words hung in the air, heavy and aching. Meretta's chest tightened. You're saying you and him, you were together? Elena nodded slowly, the truth finally spilling into the open. A long time ago. We were young, foolish. I met him when I was at university. He wasn't the man you see now. He was different then. Kinder, restless but full of dreams. Napoleon's jaw clenched, but he didn't interrupt. The memories seemed to wash over him, softening the sharpness in his eyes. He wasn't called Napoleon Padovano back then. Elena continued, her voice trembling. At least not to me. He went by Leo. I didn't know what he was involved in. I didn't know the kind of people he worked for. Napoleon looked away, guilt etched across his face. I try to protect you, he said, his tone low. You had no idea what kind of world I was in. I didn't want it to touch you. But it did, Elena said, her voice breaking. You disappeared. No calls, no letters. Nothing. I thought you were dead. I was betrayed, Napoleon said, his tone darkening. Someone close to me gave up my name. There was a raid. I had to vanish. By the time I came back, you were gone. They told me you'd been hurt, that you, he stopped, swallowing hard, that you and the baby didn't survive. Elena's hand shook as she took a step closer. I wasn't gone, she whispered. I was hiding. I found out I was pregnant a week after you disappeared. I didn't tell anyone, not even my parents. I couldn't risk it, not with your enemies still looking for you. Meretta felt the world tilt beneath her. The weight of the revelation was almost too much to bear. You raised me alone, she whispered, her voice fragile. You never told me who my father was. Elena's eyes filled with tears. Because I wanted to keep you safe, she said. I couldn't let you grow up in that world. The violence, the danger, it destroyed everything good in him. Napoleon's voice softened, carrying a note of regret. I became something I never meant to be, he said. But you and her, you were the only things I ever did right. Elena looked away, her face tightening with pain. Don't say that, she murmured. You made your choices, Napoleon. You chose that life over us. Miretta's eyes darted between them, her heart breaking at the sight of her mother's tears. So that's what the tattoo means, she said softly. It was a promise you couldn't keep. Neither of them spoke. The silence was answer enough. Napoleon finally stepped forward, his expression raw. Elena, he said, I never stopped thinking about you. About the life we could have had. I thought I'd lost everything. Now I find out I have a daughter. Our daughter, and all I can think about is how much I failed both of you. Elena's tears spilled freely now, but her voice was steady. You can't rewrite the past, Leo. Some things are too broken to fix. Miretta took a small step forward, her voice trembling. You both keep talking about the past, but what about me? She asked, her frustration boiling over. I grew up not knowing who my father was. I watched Mom struggle every single day. Do you have any idea what that was like? Napoleon's face fell. If I had known, but you didn't. Miretta snapped, her anger giving way to hurt. You didn't know, you didn't ask, and she didn't tell me. So whose fault is it? Both of yours. Elena wiped her tears, her voice quiet. Miretta, please. No, Miretta said, shaking her head. I deserve the truth. All of it. Napoleon hesitated, his expression darkening. Your mother never told you what really happened the night I disappeared, did she? Elena's eyes widened in warning. Don't, she said sharply. That's not for her to carry. Miretta's heart thudded in her chest. What night? What happened? Napoleon looked at Elena, his face torn between anger and sorrow. The night everything fell apart, he said finally. The night I lost you both. Elena's voice broke. Enough, she pleaded. Please, not now. But Miretta stepped closer, her eyes fierce. No, Mom. I need to know. Napoleon's voice was barely above a whisper. Ask her, he said. Ask her why she really left me. Elena's expression crumbled, her silence more telling than any confession. Miretta felt her stomach twist, realizing there were still secrets, layers of the past yet to be revealed. Mom, she said softly. What did you do? Elena's eyes filled with anguish. What I had to, she whispered. The air around them seemed to still. Miretta stood frozen, her mother's cryptic answer echoing in her mind. Napoleon's eyes narrowed slightly, his voice low and unsteady. There's more she hasn't told you, he said. Elena turned away, her shoulders trembling. Stop, she said, her voice barely audible. Just stop. But the look on Napoleon's face said it all. The past wasn't done with any of them. Miretta's chest tightened as the silence between her parents grew unbearable. She took a hesitant step forward, her voice breaking the tension. Tell me the truth, she whispered. Why did you lie to me all these years? Napoleon's eyes flickered with something deep and conflicted. His next words caught between confession and restraint. Miretta, he said quietly, there are things your mother did to protect you, things you might never forgive. The words hung in the night air, heavy and haunting, as Miretta realized the past was far darker than she'd ever imagined. The silence between them was thick, a blanket of unresolved history settling over the alley like an impenetrable fog. Miretta's mind raced, the weight of the revelations churning in her chest. She had come to this moment seeking answers, but now the answers seemed to only create more questions, more painful truths. She stood there, her hands trembling at her sides, staring at the man who was once her father, and yet felt like a stranger. The tattoo, the connection, the lies, it was all too much. Miretta finally spoke, her voice raw. You never looked for her, she said, her words slicing through the thick silence. You never tried to find her after you disappeared, after you left us. Why? Napoleon shifted uncomfortably, his posture rigid, as if every word she spoke cut deeper than the last. His face softened, a flicker of regret in his eyes, but his expression remained guarded. He took a deep breath before answering, as if bracing for the weight of the truth. I thought she was gone, he muttered, his voice hoarse. They told me. They said she miscarried, that you both didn't survive. His gaze dropped to the ground, his fingers twitching as if they ached to reach for something, anything. I didn't know, Miretta. I didn't know you existed. The revelation hit Meretta like a slap to the face. She staggered back, her breath catching in her throat. What do you mean, you didn't know? She demanded, her voice trembling. You didn't even try to find out? After all these years, after everything, how could you just let her disappear like that? Let me disappear? Napoleon's jaw clenched, his eyes darkening with a mix of guilt and frustration. He stepped toward her, his voice quieter now. I didn't have a choice, he said. I was running from enemies. I thought about you both every day, but I couldn't risk my world coming for you for her. I thought I was protecting you, Meretta. Protecting us? She shot back, her voice cracking with anger. By abandoning us? By leaving us to struggle, to live in the shadows? You didn't protect us. You destroyed everything. His face tightened at the accusation, but Meretta could see the guilt in his eyes, the weight of the years spent in self-imposed exile. She could almost feel the remorse emanating from him, a hollow ache that matched her own. Yet, it wasn't enough. It could never be enough. I thought she was dead, Napoleon continued, his voice barely above a whisper. The day I found out about the raid, they told me she had been gone. His hands balled into fists. I thought it was over. And then when I tried to find her, I was told there was nothing left. No traces, nothing to follow. I thought it was too late. Meretta closed her eyes, taking a deep breath as the full weight of his words crashed over her. The anger that had built up inside her for so long. The anger at the mother who had hidden the truth from her, at the father who had abandoned her, now felt hollow, replaced by something far more complicated. Was it really betrayal, or was it a choice made out of fear? Meretta didn't know. She didn't know what to feel anymore. But you left us, Meretta said, her voice a mixture of pain and disbelief. How could you just leave us like that, without even knowing if we were okay? Napoleon's eyes flickered with sorrow, and for the first time, she saw something resembling vulnerability in his gaze. I know, he said quietly. I was a fool, a selfish one, and I've been paying for it every day since. Meretta looked away, feeling a knot tighten in her chest. The years of longing for answers, for some semblance of family, seemed to crumble around her. She had spent so long resenting her mother for keeping this secret from her, for hiding the truth about her father. But now she saw the depth of Elena's pain, the weight of the choices she had been forced to make. Meretta had spent her life in the dark, never knowing the full story. And now, the truth felt more like a burden than a relief. You never tried to find me, Meretta whispered, the tears she had been holding back now threatening to spill. You never even cared to know if I was alive, did you? Napoleon's face twisted in agony. I did care, he said, his voice breaking. I always cared. I thought about you every damn day. But I couldn't let you become a part of this world. The one I live in, the one that's so far from the life I wanted for you. But you didn't even try, Meretta repeated, her voice small now. You didn't try to be a father, to be in my life. She shook her head, her emotions in turmoil. You just let us go. You let me grow up alone. The silence that followed was deafening. Napoleon's shoulders sagged, and he took a step back, his hands raised in surrender. I don't have an excuse, he said, his voice heavy with regret. But I want to make it right. I want to be part of your life, Meretta, if you'll let me. Meretta's heart ached at the vulnerability in his voice. She had always dreamed of this moment, the moment her father would come back, apologize, and take her into his arms like some fairy tale. But now that it was here, she wasn't sure what to do with it. She was torn between the years of abandonment, the betrayal, and the sudden hope that maybe, just maybe, she could have the father she had always longed for. A long pause stretched between them, the weight of the unspoken hanging heavily in the air. Finally, Meretta spoke again, her voice small but firm. How old are you? She asked, looking up at him with tear-filled eyes. Napoleon blinked, taken aback by the question. He met her gaze, his own expression filled with confusion and curiosity. What do you mean? Meretta's breath caught as she watched the realization slowly dawn on him. How old are you? She repeated, her voice barely audible. The question seemed to unravel him. His face went pale as the truth settled in. Meretta, you don't. But she didn't need him to finish. She had already put the pieces together in her mind. He had no idea. He hadn't known about her, not really. And now, as the truth hit him, her age, the timeline, the missed years, it was clear that the past had come back to haunt them both. Miretta's heart pounded in her chest. She waited, her eyes locked on Napoleon's, knowing the weight of the moment could change everything. The silence between them felt suffocating. Finally, Napoleon's voice faltered, the words escaping from him in a tremble. "How old are you?" he whispered, his gaze searching hers. Miretta swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath. "I'm 25, she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. Napoleon's expression faltered, his hand gripping the edge of the table. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He had missed so much. All those years, all that time lost. He had never known the daughter he had abandoned. The room seemed to close in around them as Miretta's words settled between them. Napoleon stood motionless, his face drained of color, as the gravity of the situation became clear to him. Miretta's heart raced as the truth finally broke through, the weight of the past and the present settling in. Napoleon stared at her, his mind struggling to process the years lost, the child he had never known. And in that moment, the only thing that remained clear was the long road ahead, filled with questions, pain, and the undeniable need for redemption. As Napoleon's voice faltered, Miretta knew that this crossroads could either shatter them further or give them the chance to rebuild. She wasn't sure which path they would take, but she knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The soft hum of the city outside faded as Miretta and Napoleon stood in the cramped alley, their conversation hanging in the cool night air. It was as though the whole world had stopped, suspended in the weight of the truth that had just been unearthed. The silence between them felt almost tangible, pressing in on both of them as they stood at the edge of something neither was prepared for. Miretta's mind raced, but it wasn't the present that consumed her thoughts, it was the past. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and with each fragment, the story of her mother's hidden pain and sacrifice began to unfold. Napoleon's voice interrupted her thoughts, hoarse and distant. "I didn't think I would ever get to this point." He ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair, his eyes heavy with the weight of unspoken regret. "I never thought I'd have to face what I left behind." Miretta swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" Before he could respond, the silence was broken by a sudden, sharp flash of memory. His own, not hers. His eyes distant, his mind clearly lost in another time. The scene shifted in Miretta's mind as if she, too, was being pulled into a forgotten past. It was a different world back then. A world where Napoleon and Elena had dreams of a life they would build together, before shadows crept in and tore them apart. In the summer of 1999, Napoleon Padovano was a young man with ambitions larger than the city itself. His sharp eyes and commanding presence had already earned him respect in the circles he navigated, but it was his heart that Elena had captured. She was nothing like the women he was used to. Elena was quieter, more reserved, but with a depth that intrigued him. She had a fire within her that matched his own, one he couldn't resist. Their love, at first, had been simple, full of dreams and promises. "Let's get tattoos," Elena had said one late evening as they sat together in a small cafe overlooking the harbor. The idea had come to her out of the blue, her eyes sparkling with the thrill of something spontaneous. To remind us of what we mean to each other. They had discussed it endlessly, choosing the design carefully, a nautical star, a symbol of guidance, of finding one's way home. They had both agreed on the date, June 14th, 2000, the day they would forever mark their bond. And so they did. They sat together in a small tattoo parlor, the buzzing needle a steady rhythm in the background, as the artist inked the same star on their hands. Their hearts beat as one, the ink sealing a promise they believed would last forever. But the world, as it always did, had different plans. Napoleon's voice trembled as he continued, his tone distant, the pain of that time still so raw. "We were happy once. I thought we were untouchable, but I was wrong. Meretta watched him carefully, trying to reconcile the image of the man before her with the one he was describing. "What happened?" she asked quietly. He looked at her, his eyes haunted. "It was never meant to end like that. You have to understand, Elena, she meant everything to me." His voice broke, but he continued, each word a slow confession. "But then I was betrayed. It wasn't her fault, but I had to make choices. I thought I was protecting her. I thought I was doing the right thing. I didn't know that I was destroying everything." Meretta's stomach twisted as she began to see the complexity of the situation. She had always assumed that Elena's silence, her avoidance of the subject of Napoleon, had been out of shame or bitterness. But now, it seemed there was far more to it, something deeper that her mother had never shared with her. "Elena loved you," Meretta said, more to herself than to Napoleon, her voice barely a whisper. "She never told me, but I know she did." He nodded, his expression pained. "I never wanted to hurt her, Meretta, but I was trapped. I had enemies, people who would have used her to get to me. I couldn't let that happen. I had to walk away, even if it killed me inside." Meretta's heart ached as the pieces began to fall into place. Her mother's pain, the silence that had followed Elena's life, the walls she'd built around her daughter, it all started to make sense. Elena had kept the secret, not because of resentment, but because she had been protecting Meretta. She had sacrificed everything to keep her safe from the world that Napoleon was tangled in, a world that Meretta had never known. Meretta's thoughts swirled in confusion, her emotions clashing. "But you didn't even try to find her. After everything, you didn't even try." Napoleon looked away, his gaze distant, clouded by regret. "I thought she was better off without me. I thought I could give her a chance at a normal life, without the danger. But I was wrong. I should have never left." Meretta felt a bitter sense of understanding growing inside her. She had spent so many years resenting her mother for hiding the truth from her. She had always wondered why Elena never spoke of her father, why Meretta had grown up without the man who was supposed to be there. But now, as the truth unfolded, Meretta could see her mother's love for her had been the driving force behind her silence. "Why didn't she tell me?" Meretta asked, her voice cracking. "Why didn't she tell me about you? About us?" Napoleon sighed deeply, as if the weight of the question was too much for him. "She didn't want you to know the truth. She thought it would only cause you pain, Meretta. She thought you'd be better off never knowing about me, never knowing about the things I did, the choices I made. She thought she could protect you by keeping you away from me. But now, it seems like everything has come full circle." Meretta's mind reeled, her heart torn between understanding the complexity of her mother's decision and the overwhelming sense of betrayal she still felt. How could Elena have kept this secret from her for so long? How could she have kept the truth about Napoleon from her? And yet, as the pieces of the past clicked into place, Meretta began to see that Elena's silence wasn't just about protecting her from the Mafia world. It was about protecting her from the pain that came with loving a man who could never truly be there. As Napoleon looked at her, his eyes filled with guilt and sorrow, Meretta knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The weight of the past, of all the years lost, now hung between them, a barrier that seemed impossible to cross. And yet, as much as she wanted to hate him for abandoning her and her mother, she couldn't help but wonder, was it too late for forgiveness? "Do you think I can forgive you?" Meretta asked, her voice small but determined. Napoleon met her gaze, his expression softening. "I don't know, but I'm here, Meretta, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right." The silence between them stretched, and for the first time in years, Meretta felt the faintest glimmer of hope, a hope that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild what had been broken. Meretta's heart was a battlefield, torn between anger, confusion, and the possibility of reconciliation. Could she forgive a man who had abandoned her for so long? Could she find a way to trust him, to open her heart to the father she never knew? As she stood there, staring at Napoleon, she realized that the hardest part wasn't facing him, it was facing herself. Could she forgive him, or would the past always stand in the way? Meretta stood in the dim alley, the weight of the truth settling over her like a heavy, suffocating fog. Napoleon Padovano, The Mafia boss, whose name had always been whispered in the darkest corners of the city, was her father. The revelation had shattered everything she thought she knew about herself. Her life, the one she had worked so hard to build, seemed to lose its shape and purpose as the truth of her parentage began to take hold. She had spent so many years wondering why her mother had kept the secret, why Elena had hidden this man from her. And now, standing here with Napoleon, Meretta realized that it wasn't just her mother who had kept secrets. The truth about her father, the very foundation of her identity, had been buried for a reason. And now, as the pieces fell into place, she didn't know what to do with them. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to make sense of it all. She was a waitress in a high-end restaurant, serving wine to powerful men and women who lived in worlds that felt as distant to her as the stars. She had always been invisible to them, nothing more than a fixture in their lives, someone to take their orders and disappear. But now, with the revelation of who her father was, her world felt unmoored. She was no longer just Meretta Bruno, the waitress. She was the daughter of a mafia boss, a man whose empire was built on power, secrecy, and betrayal. The thought made her stomach churn. How could she fit into this world? How could she reconcile the life she had known with the one that Napoleon had led? And worse, how could she ever forgive him for abandoning her and her mother all those years ago? Napoleon, too, was struggling with the weight of the revelation. For so many years, he had buried the truth, convinced himself that the woman he had loved and lost had taken the secret of their child with her to the grave. And now, standing before Meretta, he saw the daughter he had never known, a woman who had grown up without him, who had lived in the shadows of a world he had tried to protect her from. The guilt gnawed at him, the years of self-imposed exile suddenly feeling like a punishment he had never deserved but had somehow earned. He had betrayed Elena, and by doing so, he had betrayed the child they could have had together. He had never known that Meretta was alive, that she had been raised by the woman he had once loved. He had lived in a world of power and violence, thinking he was protecting them both by keeping his distance. But now, the truth had come crashing down, and there was no escaping the consequences. He watched Meretta, her face a mixture of anger, confusion, and pain. She wasn't ready to forgive him, and he couldn't blame her. He had no right to ask for her forgiveness. All he could do was try to make things right, try to build some kind of connection with the daughter he had abandoned. But was it too late? Could he ever earn her trust? Meretta took a deep breath, the air in the alley sharp and cold against her skin. She had no idea what to say to him or even what to think anymore. The man before her was a stranger, a powerful figure who had never been part of her life. He had no place in her world, no place in the life she had built for herself. And yet, here he was, her father. "Why didn't you try to find us?" Meretta asked, her voice quieter now, but still filled with the rawness of her emotions. "You never tried to make amends. You just disappeared. For 25 years. Napoleon's face softened, a flicker of guilt in his eyes. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting you both. I thought that by staying away, I was keeping you safe from the world I live in. But you didn't even know if we were okay," Meretta said, her voice trembling with the weight of her pain. "You didn't care enough to find out." "I did care," Napoleon replied, his voice strained. "Every day, I thought about you. But the world I'm in, it's dangerous. I couldn't risk bringing that danger into your life. I thought you were better off without me." Meretta shook her head, her chest tight with emotion. "Better off without you?" she repeated. "I needed you. I needed a father. Instead, I got nothing. My whole life, I wondered why I didn't have a father, why I was raised alone. And now, after all these years, you expect me to just forgive you?" Napoleon took a step closer, his voice desperate. "I never wanted to hurt you, Meretta. I never wanted to abandon you. But I was trapped in a world I couldn't escape. And I thought I was protecting you by staying away. But I was wrong. I was wrong to think you'd be better off without me." Meretta's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. "And now? Now you want to make things right?" she asked, her voice bitter. "After all this time, after everything, you want me to just forgive you?" Napoleon's face hardened, but his eyes were filled with something softer, something that spoke of the years of regret he had carried. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said quietly, "but I want to try, Moretta. I want to be a part of your life, if you'll let me." Moretta's heart ached at his words, but she didn't know if she could ever trust him again. The anger, the confusion, the pain was all too much. How could she forgive him for a lifetime of abandonment? How could she open herself up to a man who had never been there for her? The silence stretched between them, heavy and thick. Moretta could feel the weight of the past pressing down on her, threatening to crush her. She had spent her whole life without him, and now, after all these years, she was supposed to just accept him into her life. The idea felt impossible, but at the same time, there was something within her, a small seed of hope, that wondered if it was possible to rebuild what had been lost. "I don't know if I can do this," Moretta whispered, her voice barely audible. Napoleon's face softened, and he nodded slowly. "I understand, but I'm asking for a chance, Moretta. Just a chance to prove that I could be the father you deserve." Moretta looked at him, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. She didn't know if she was ready to forgive him, but deep down she knew one thing. The past had caught up with her, and there was no escaping it now. "I'll meet you again," Moretta said softly, "but I don't know if I can forgive you." "Not yet." Napoleon nodded, his expression filled with relief and sorrow in equal measure. "That's all I can ask for." As Moretta turned to leave, Napoleon reached out and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "I'll be here," he said quietly. "Whenever you're ready." Moretta nodded, the words hanging in the air as she walked away. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she was standing at the edge of something new, something uncertain, and yet she couldn't help but wonder if it was the beginning of a healing she had never thought possible. Moretta walked away from Napoleon, each step heavy with the weight of his words and the past they had just unearthed. The alley, once quiet, now felt suffocating with the weight of everything that had been said and everything that had been left unsaid. As she walked through the dim-lit streets, the city felt distant, as though it belonged to another world, another time. It wasn't just the revelation of her father's identity that weighed on her. It was the burden of everything she had carried for 25 years. Her heart was torn in so many directions. The anger that had bubbled up over the years, the resentment for the life she had been forced to live without answers, still simmered beneath the surface. But there was something else, something softer, that was creeping in. A small, tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, her life could be different. That maybe, after all this time, she could finally have the father she had been denied. But the question still loomed in her mind. Could she forgive him? Could she accept Napoleon, the man who had abandoned her mother and her, the man who had chosen his world over them? The next few days passed in a blur, a haze of emotional turmoil and fragmented thoughts. Moretta couldn't shake the image of Napoleon's face when he asked her about her age. The raw vulnerability he had shown, the deep regret, had unsettled her. He was a man built on power, yet in that moment he seemed so small, so human. He hadn't reached out again, but Moretta couldn't stop thinking about what he had said. He wanted to make amends. He wanted to be a part of her life, and that's what finally brought her back to him. The question that haunted her, was she ready to let him in? Could she forgive the man who had walked away from them, who had been living a life she could never understand? She stood at the window of her small apartment, watching the rain pour down in sheets, the city outside shrouded in gray. The sound of the rain tapping against the window was a steady rhythm, a quiet companion to her thoughts. She had called Napoleon that morning, and now he was waiting for her in the same alley where they had shared the moment of truth. As Moretta stepped into the alley, she saw him standing there, a familiar figure in a dark suit. This time his posture was less rigid, less commanding. There was no air of authority around him, just a man trying to make things right. Napoleon looked up as she approached, his face softening. "Moretta," he said, his voice carrying the weight of an apology he wasn't sure he could ever fully express. She nodded, her eyes meeting his, still guarded but willing to listen. "You wanted to talk," she said, her voice steady but not without the tremor of emotion beneath it. You wanted to make things right. But how? How do you make up for 25 years of nothing? Napoleon took a step closer, his gaze intense but sincere. I can't change what I did, Meretta. I can't undo the pain I caused. But I'm willing to do anything, to be a part of your life. I know it's too late, but I can't live with the regret of never trying. I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I was protecting you. She shook her head, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I can just forget everything and pretend it doesn't hurt. Napoleon's eyes darkened with the weight of his own guilt. I understand, he said quietly, but I'm asking for a chance to show you that I can be here for you. I can't promise I'll fix everything, but I want to try. For both of us. Meretta stood still for a moment, the words hanging between them. The air was thick with the tension of the past and the uncertainty of the future. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this man, this stranger who was supposed to be her father, could change the course of her life. But could she let him in? Could she risk the same heartbreak that had come with every unanswered question of her childhood? Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. What do we do now? Napoleon's face softened, his relief palpable. Now, we find your mother. I can't fix everything, but I can start by making things right with her. I need to speak with her. I need to understand why she kept me away, why she kept you from me. Meretta's stomach churned at the thought of facing her mother. The silence Elena had held all these years. Was it truly about protecting her, or was it a deeper, more painful secret that had driven them both apart? But deep down she knew. She had to do this. She had to confront the truth, for herself and for her mother. Okay, Meretta said, her voice small but resolute. Let's do it. The next few days were filled with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. Napoleon and Meretta spent hours together, the awkwardness of their first meeting replaced by a quiet understanding. They had a long road ahead, one that would require both of them to face the past and rebuild what had been lost. But as they sat together in the car, Meretta could feel the weight of the moment settling over them both. They were about to face Elena, Meretta's mother, Napoleon's lost love, the woman who had held all the answers, all the secrets. And yet, Meretta wasn't sure if she was ready to hear them. Are you sure about this? Napoleon asked quietly, glancing at Meretta. Meretta nodded, her jaw clenched with the uncertainty of it all. I don't know, she admitted, but I can't keep living in the dark. I need the truth, even if it hurts. As they arrived at the small apartment where Elena had lived for years, Meretta's pulse quickened. She hadn't seen her mother in over a week, hadn't even spoken to her since the night Napoleon had arrived. The air around them seemed to hum with anticipation. Meretta stepped out of the car, her legs shaky, her heart racing. Napoleon followed her, his presence a silent reassurance. They walked up the narrow stairs to the apartment door, the familiar scent of the building's old wood and dust filling Meretta's lungs. When she knocked, her hand trembling, the door opened slowly. Elena stood there, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with shock at the sight of both Meretta and Napoleon standing there. Meretta, Elena's voice cracked, and she took a step back, almost as if she were trying to retreat into the safety of her own silence. Mama, Meretta whispered, her voice catching in her throat. We need to talk. Napoleon stood beside her, his expression soft yet filled with determination. Elena, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. It's time. Elena's face paled as she stepped back from the door, her eyes darting between Meretta and Napoleon. For the first time in years, the truth that had been buried deep within her, was about to surface. Would Elena finally open up, or would her silence continue to haunt them all? The answer would come soon, but Meretta wasn't sure she was ready for what she might learn. The door creaked as Elena stepped back, her face a ghostly shade of white. Meretta could see the shock and fear in her mother's eyes, and yet there was something else lurking there too, something deeper. The woman who had always been her protector, the one who had shielded her from the harsh realities of the world, was now standing at the precipice of a truth she could no longer hide. Meretta stood frozen, her mind reeling from the night's events, The collision of past and present that had left her feeling like she was unraveling. Napoleon's presence beside her only heightened the tension. This was no longer just about him. It was about her mother's secrets, the lies that had been buried for so long, and the unresolved anger that Meretta had carried all these years. Elena's gaze flickered from Napoleon to Meretta, her lips trembling as if the words she had been holding back for years were finally clawing their way to the surface. Why now? Elena's voice was barely a whisper, laden with regret. Why did you bring him here, Meretta? Her eyes darted to Napoleon, then back to her daughter. After everything, I never wanted you to find out. Meretta's chest tightened with the familiar sting of betrayal. You never wanted me to find out? She echoed, her voice cold with disbelief. Why, Mama? Why didn't you tell me the truth about him? About us? Elena's face twisted with pain, and for a moment, Meretta saw a flash of vulnerability in her mother that she had never seen before. I was protecting you, Meretta, she said, her voice thick with emotion. From him, from that life, from everything he brought into our world. Meretta's anger flared. Protecting me? She repeated bitterly. You think hiding the truth from me all these years was protection? You think keeping me in the dark, making me wonder about my father, was the right choice? I didn't know what else to do. Elena cried, tears streaming down her face. You were a baby, Meretta. I couldn't let you grow up in that world. I couldn't let you fall into the same darkness that I did. Napoleon stood silently beside Meretta, his face etched with remorse. I never wanted that for her, he said quietly, his voice heavy with regret. I wanted to give you both a life away from this, Elena. But I failed you. I failed both of you. Meretta's fists clenched at her sides, the raw anger she had felt for so many years bubbling to the surface. She had always wondered why her mother had kept her father's identity hidden, but now, with the truth spilling out in front of her, the weight of it all felt suffocating. You didn't just fail us, Napoleon, she said, her voice trembling with fury. You abandoned us. You left us to fend for ourselves, and for what? To protect us? To protect me? I spent my whole life thinking something was wrong with me, that I wasn't worth your time, that you never cared enough to even find out if I was alive. And now you expect me to believe that this was all to protect me. Napoleon's face crumbled, the weight of her words hitting him like a physical blow. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry, Meretta. I never wanted you to feel that way. I thought I was doing the right thing by staying away, by keeping you out of my world. But now I see I was wrong. I see I made a terrible mistake. Meretta took a step back, her hands shaking with the intensity of her emotions. You can't just say sorry and make it go away, she said, her voice low and full of pain. You can't just undo all the years of hurt and neglect with a few words. Elena reached for Meretta's arm, her grip gentle but firm. Meretta, please. I did what I thought was best. I kept you away from him because I knew the danger, the violence. I knew what he was involved in. The life he led, it wasn't a life I wanted for you. I couldn't risk it. I couldn't risk you being dragged into that world. Meretta's gaze shifted to Napoleon, his face a mixture of sorrow and guilt. She saw the man who had built an empire, who had lived a life of power and fear. But she also saw the man who, for all his power, was now standing before her, broken and vulnerable. I understand why you did it, Mama, Meretta said quietly, her voice softer now, tinged with understanding. I understand that you were trying to protect me, but I don't know if I can ever forgive you for keeping this secret from me, for keeping me in the dark about who I am. Napoleon stepped forward, his hand reaching out, but Meretta pulled away, her emotions too raw to be touched. I don't expect forgiveness, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of his regret. But I'm asking for a chance to be a part of your life. I know I can't undo the past, but I want to be here now. I want to make things right, Meretta. Meretta looked between her parents, her heart torn between the years of abandonment and the small flicker of hope that burned inside her. She wanted to hate him, wanted to throw the pain of her childhood in his face. But she couldn't help but feel the pull of something deeper, the desire for a connection she had never known, the longing for a father, even one who had come too late. Her breath hitched as she looked at her mother. And you, Mama? What about you? Why didn't you ever tell me the truth? Elena's voice cracked as she stepped closer, her hands trembling. I couldn't tell you, Moretta. I thought if I kept you away from him, kept you away from the truth, you'd be safe. I thought I was protecting you. But now, I see I was wrong. I see I kept you from knowing a part of yourself. And for that, I am sorry. Moretta stood in silence, her heart a battleground between anger and understanding. Could she forgive her mother for keeping this secret from her? Could she forgive Napoleon for abandoning them both? The answers weren't clear, but for the first time, she realized that the only way to move forward was to confront the past. As the silence stretched between them, Moretta's mind raced with the weight of their confessions. Could she ever forgive them both? Could she rebuild the shattered pieces of her past and forge a new path forward? Moretta's eyes flickered to Napoleon, then to Elena. I don't know, she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know if I can do this, but I need time. Napoleon nodded, his face filled with understanding. Take all the time you need, Moretta. I'll be here whenever you're ready. Moretta stood there, her heart torn between the past and the future. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. This was the beginning of a new chapter in her life. And whatever came next, she would face it with her eyes wide open. Moretta stood on the threshold of a life she hadn't expected, a future that now seemed to stretch before her in a way that was both terrifying and hopeful. The truth was clear, but the road ahead was not. The pieces of her past had been laid bare in a way she had never imagined, and now it was up to her to decide what to do with them, to decide what kind of life she wanted to rebuild, what kind of future she wanted to fight for. Napoleon stood a few steps away, his presence a quiet weight that hovered between them. His gaze was patient, understanding, but there was an edge of vulnerability in his posture that reminded her that, just like her, he didn't know what came next either. I don't know if I can forgive you, Moretta said softly, her voice filled with the rawness of everything they had just revealed. But I think I can give us a chance. A real chance to try again. Napoleon's face softened with relief, but there was still a flicker of doubt in his eyes. I'll do whatever it takes, he said quietly, his voice full of the sincerity that had been missing in his earlier, colder exchanges. I won't rush you. I'll be here for you, Moretta, in whatever way you need me to be. She nodded slowly, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. It wasn't a perfect solution. It wasn't the happily ever after she'd once imagined as a little girl, waiting for a father who never came. But it was a start, and sometimes a start was enough. The next few weeks were a blur of small, quiet moments. Napoleon had kept his word. He didn't push her, didn't demand more than she was willing to give. Instead, he simply showed up at the cafe where she worked, at her apartment door, at the local park where they walked in silence, side by side. It was a strange and tentative dance, each of them learning how to navigate a relationship that had been severed long before it had even begun. It wasn't easy. Moretta had moments where the anger resurfaced, where the weight of everything she had lost pressed down on her chest with such force that she couldn't breathe. She still couldn't shake the feeling that a part of her had been stolen, that the years she could never get back would forever hang between them like a thick fog. But at the same time, she felt something she hadn't in years, hope. A fragile, tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, they could build something from the ashes of their shared past. One evening, as they sat together in the small park near Moretta's apartment, the sound of laughter and distant voices filled the air. Napoleon looked over at her, his eyes softening with an unspoken question. I know it's not the same, he said quietly, but can we try to be something more than strangers? Can we try to build something together? Moretta met his gaze, her heart heavy with the weight of everything they had been through. She had no illusions that they could erase the past, that they could somehow undo the hurt. But maybe, just maybe, they could learn to walk forward one step at a time. I'm willing to try, she said, her voice steady but filled with the vulnerability she hadn't let herself feel in years. I want to try Napoleon, but it has to be on my terms. He nodded, his expression filled with understanding. Of course, I'll do whatever it takes. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. For the first time in a long time, Meretta felt like she was not just a product of her past, but the architect of her future. Meretta's gaze shifted to Napoleon, his face a mixture of sorrow and guilt. She saw the man who had built an empire, who had lived a life of power and fear. But she also saw the man who, for all his power, was now standing before her, broken and vulnerable. "I understand why you did it, Mama," Meretta said quietly, her voice softer now, tinged with understanding. "I understand that you were trying to protect me, but I don't know if I can ever forgive you for keeping this secret from me, for keeping me in the dark about who I am." Napoleon stepped forward, his hand reaching out, but Meretta pulled away, her emotions too raw to be touched. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of his regret. "But I'm asking for a chance to be a part of your life. I know I can't undo the past, but I want to be here now. I want to make things right, Meretta." Meretta looked between her parents, her heart torn between the years of abandonment and the small flicker of hope that burned inside her. She wanted to hate him, wanted to throw the pain of her childhood in his face. But she couldn't help but feel the pull of something deeper, the desire for a connection she had never known, the longing for a father, even one who had come too late. Her breath hitched as she looked at her mother. "And you, Mama? What about you? Why didn't you ever tell me the truth?" Elena's voice cracked as she stepped closer, her hands trembling. "I couldn't tell you, Meretta. I thought if I kept you away from him, kept you away from the truth, you'd be safe. I thought I was protecting you. But now, I see I was wrong. I see I kept you from knowing a part of yourself. And for that, I am sorry." Meretta stood in silence, her heart a battleground between anger and understanding. Could she forgive her mother for keeping this secret from her? Could she forgive Napoleon for abandoning them both? The answers weren't clear, but for the first time, she realized that the only way to move forward was to confront the past. As the silence stretched between them, Meretta's mind raced with the weight of their confessions. Could she ever forgive them both? Could she rebuild the shattered pieces of her past and forge a new path forward? Meretta's eyes flickered to Napoleon, then to Elena. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can do this, but I need time." Napoleon nodded, his face filled with understanding. "Take all the time you need, Meretta. I'll be here whenever you're ready." Meretta stood there, her heart torn between the past and the future. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. This was the beginning of a new chapter in her life. And whatever came next, she would face it with her eyes wide open. Meretta stood on the threshold of a life she hadn't expected, a future that now seemed to stretch before her in a way that was both terrifying and hopeful. The truth was clear, but the road ahead was not. The pieces of her past had been laid bare in a way she had never imagined, and now it was up to her to decide what to do with them, to decide what kind of life she wanted to rebuild, what kind of future she wanted to fight for. Napoleon stood a few steps away, his presence a quiet weight that hovered between them. His gaze was patient, understanding, but there was an edge of vulnerability in his posture that reminded her that, just like her, he didn't know what came next either. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Meretta said softly, her voice filled with the rawness of everything they had just revealed. "But I think I can give us a chance. A real chance to try again." Napoleon's face softened with relief, but there was still a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said quietly, his voice full of the sincerity that had been missing in his earlier, colder exchanges. "I won't rush you. I'll be here for you, Meretta, in whatever way you need me to be." She nodded slowly, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. It wasn't a perfect solution. It wasn't the happily ever after she'd once imagined as a little girl, waiting for a father who never came. But it was a start, and sometimes a start was enough. The next few weeks were a blur of small, quiet moments. Napoleon had kept his word. He didn't push her, didn't demand more than she was willing to give. Instead, he simply showed up at the cafe where she worked, at her apartment door, at the local park where they walked in silence, side by side. It was a strange and tentative dance, each of them learning how to navigate a relationship that had been severed long before it had even begun. It wasn't easy. Meretta had moments where the anger resurfaced, where the weight of everything she had lost pressed down on her chest with such force that she couldn't breathe. She still couldn't shake the feeling that a part of her had been stolen, that the years she could never get back would forever hang between them like a thick fog. But at the same time, she felt something she hadn't in years: hope. A fragile, tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, they could build something from the ashes of their shared past. One evening, as they sat together in the small park near Meretta's apartment, the sound of laughter and distant voices filled the air. Napoleon looked over at her, his eyes softening with an unspoken question. "I know it's not the same," he said quietly, "but can we try to be something more than strangers? Can we try to build something together?" Meretta met his gaze, her heart heavy with the weight of everything they had been through. She had no illusions that they could erase the past, that they could somehow undo the hurt. But maybe, just maybe, they could learn to walk forward one step at a time. "I'm willing to try," she said, her voice steady but filled with the vulnerability she hadn't let herself feel in years. "I want to try, Napoleon, but it has to be on my terms." He nodded, his expression filled with understanding. "Of course, I'll do whatever it takes." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun dip below the horizon, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. For the first time in a long time, Meretta felt like she was not just a product of her past, but the architect of her future. In the weeks that followed, they slowly began to rebuild their relationship, one small step at a time. There were still moments of tension, still remnants of the old wounds that hadn't fully healed. But they began to understand each other in ways they never had before. Meretta began to see the man Napoleon had been before his life had consumed him, the young man who had once loved her mother with such intensity. She saw the man he was now, the man who had learned the hard way that the price of power was often far too high. Napoleon, for his part, began to understand the depth of the pain he had caused. He could never undo the years of hurt, but he could show Meretta that he was willing to change, to be the father he had never been. It was a slow process, a fragile process, but it was theirs to navigate. Meretta stood in front of her apartment window, watching the city below. The skyline stretched out before her, a sea of lights and possibility. She had always seen the city as a place of noise, of chaos, a place where she was just one small person in a world that didn't care. But now, standing at the edge of this new beginning, she saw it differently. She saw the beauty in the small moments, the quiet conversations, the shared silences, the new beginnings that came with every sunrise. She thought about everything she had learned over the past few weeks, the power of forgiveness, the importance of understanding, and the strength that came from confronting the past. Meretta had always believed that her identity was shaped by the things that happened to her, by the people who had failed her. But now, she realized that it was up to her to shape her own story. Napoleon's words echoed in her mind, and for the first time, they felt like a promise of something new. "We'll make it through this, Meretta, one step at a time." She had no idea what the future held, but she was finally ready to face it with open eyes. It was late one evening, and Meretta and Napoleon sat in the quiet of her small apartment, the room filled with the soft glow of the lamp. They had spent the evening talking, sharing stories of their pasts, Napoleon of the world he had come from, Meretta of the life she had fought so hard to build on her own. "Do you think we'll ever be the family we should have been?" Meretta asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Napoleon looked at her, his eyes filled with a quiet determination. "I don't know, Meretta, but I'll be here. No matter what, I'll be here." Meretta smiled, a small but genuine smile. "I'm still not sure about a lot of things," she said, "but for the first time, I'm not afraid to try." Napoleon reached across the table, his hand resting gently over hers. For the first time, Meretta didn't pull away. Instead, she let the moment linger, letting herself believe that this fragile connection could be the start of something new. And for the first time in years, she felt the smallest glimmer of hope, a hope that despite everything, they could still be family. As they sat there, the weight of the past finally giving way to something lighter, Meretta couldn't help but wonder, would they truly make it through? Could forgiveness be enough to heal the wounds of the past? Or would the shadow of their broken family always loom over them? The answers, like everything else, would take time. But for the first time, Meretta was willing to find out.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.